So, when you picture learning a new language, what comes to mind? Probably you, speaking, right? Maybe ordering a coffee in Paris or chatting with a local in Tokyo. But what if I told you the real secret to fluency actually starts with being quiet?
Yeah, everyone says you gotta speak from day one, right? Just jump in, make mistakes, practice makes perfect. But is that really how our brains are designed to pick up a new language? Is that the whole story?
Well, it turns out some experts have a pretty radical, kind of counterintuitive idea. They say that before we can even think about speaking, our brains need this silent period, a time to just listen, to absorb and process everything. It's all about getting the understanding down first.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, what does understanding before speaking actually mean? Then we'll check out a really famous method that's all about this. After that, we'll get into the brain science of why this works. And finally, we'll see what it looks like in a real classroom. Sound good? Let's go.
All right, let's jump into part one, understanding before speaking. And yeah, it's this kind of wild idea that the best way to start speaking is to start by listening.
Okay, so the fancy term for this is comprehension-based approaches. And the logic is, super simple when you think about it. You can't produce language you don't understand. It's impossible, right? So the whole game shifts from trying to speak to trying to get as much meaningful input, listening and reading, as possible.
And this is a total game changer from what you might remember from school. Forget about endless grammar drills. That's the form. Here, it's all about the meaning. And maybe the best part, there's way less pressure to speak right away. That low anxiety vibe is absolutely crucial because it lets your brain just relax and soak up the language.
So you can really see the two camps here, right? On the one side, you've got these methods that are all about speak, speak, speak from the very first lesson. And on the other, you have this comprehension-based idea, which is basically about trusting that if you get enough input, you can understand, the speaking part will just happen. It'll emerge on its own.
Okay, so this all sounds great in theory, but what does it look like as an actual teaching method? Well, that brings us to section 2, the natural approach. And the name kind of gives it away, right? The whole goal is to mimic how we learned our first language when we were just kids.
This approach was pioneered by a linguist named Stephen Krashen, and it's built on his really influential idea called the input hypothesis. Think of this hypothesis as the engine that makes the whole thing run.
The core of his idea is this little formula I plus 1. So I is your current level. It's everything you already understand. The plus 1 is the new stuff, but it's just one step beyond what you know. It's not so difficult that you're totally lost, but it's challenging enough to learn something new. Krashen believed that our brains are basically hardwired to acquire language when we get input in that perfect little sweet spot. So a classroom using the natural approach, it's going to feel different. You'll do a lot of listening, maybe to interesting stories or conversations, and crucially, you're not forced to speak. It's a low-anxiety zone. And this isn't just about being nice, it's about brain science. When you're stressed, your brain kind of throws up a wall, a filter that blocks new information. So keeping things relaxed and tolerating errors, that's key to letting the language in.
Okay, we've talked about what these approaches are and seen an example. But now we get to the really cool part. Why does this work? Why does the brain seem to prefer this thinking, not repeating method? Let's get into the cognitive science behind it. This brings us to something called the cognitive approach. It basically argues that learning a language isn't just about forming habits, like muscle memory. No, it's an active mental process. Your brain isn't just a parrot repeating phrases. It's more like a detective, actively solving a puzzle, looking for patterns, and figuring out the rules for itself.
And this chart really lays it out. The old school way, behaviorism, was all about stimulus and response. Hear a word, repeat it, form a habit. But the cognitive approach, it's a completely different ballgame. It sees learning as a mental process, about understanding and internalizing the rules, not just mindlessly repeating things.
And this isn't some fringe idea, by the way. It lines up perfectly with the work of the legendary linguist Noam Chomsky. His whole thing was that humans are born with this innate capacity for language. Like we have a built-in program in our brains that's just waiting to figure out the grammar of whatever language we're exposed to.
All right, enough theory, let's get practical. How does this translate from the lab to the classroom? What does this actually look like when you're trying to learn?
Well, for starters, the whole vibe is different. The teacher acts less like an instructor and more like a facilitator or a guide. The focus is on discovery. And get this, errors aren't something to be afraid of. They're actually seen as a good thing. They're evidence that your brain is working, testing hypotheses, and figuring out the system.
So the activities you do are different too. Instead of just fill-in-the-blank worksheets, you might get a problem-solving task, or maybe the teacher gives you a bunch of sentences and you have to figure out the grammar rule for yourself. It's all about making your brain think and construct its own understanding, not just passively absorb facts.
So, if you put it all together, you can see the huge shift, right? We're moving away from this idea of learning language through repetition and habit and moving toward a model based on understanding and mental processing. It's about engaging with the language as a puzzle to be solved, not just a list of words to be memorized.
And this quote really sums it all up beautifully. Effective language teaching recognizes that understanding is the gateway to communication. It's not about what you can repeat, it's about what you truly understand.
So, if there's one thing you take away from this, let it be this. Language isn't just learned through practice. It's learned through real, meaningful mental engagement and comprehension. Speaking isn't the cause of learning, it's the result. The real work, the real magic, happens quietly, inside your brain, as you piece it all together.